Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Area Podcast. I'm Lena.
I'm Lena.
And I'm Josie.
This episode will focus on racial and cultural sensitivity. Cue the intro.
The Area Podcast is brought to you by the Anti-Racism in Education Alliance. This discussion-based podcast aims to analyze subjects regarding racism and social justice. We encourage you to talk about similar topics to your friends, family, and surrounding community. Thank you for listening. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to another Area Podcast episode. As it was mentioned before, today we're going to talk about racial and cultural sensitivity. So, Lena, what grade are you guys in? Let's start off with that.
Both in eighth grade.
In eighth grade. So, I was originally very shocked to find out that somebody as young as you guys wanted to join our anti-racist club. Just because I didn't think a lot of people in your grade would be concerned about such a aggressive issue, or even be aware of it. So first of all, thank you for joining our club. Thank you for joining our podcast. We're very glad to have you on here. So yeah, today's topic is racial and cultural sensitivity. So let's start off with our first point. So sensitivity regarding topics of racism. Lena, do you want to go first?
I think a lot of people in Japan have a harder time acknowledging that racism even exists because it's so foreign to them. Obviously, because Japan is so highly homogenous, there's just a majority of Japanese people. So when they hear that, they're so underinformed that it's it's for them it's like a foreign thing and it's really hard to talk about it, and even if you're starting to talk about it, they'll see it as like an issue that's not their own, so they'll usually try to shut you down or kind of de-escalate the situation or make it sound as if it's not a real thing. People are particularly sensitive to racism in Japan just because of its circumstances.
Yeah, 100%. Um, I actually don't have anything to add to that. I think you actually said everything I wanted to. Lena, what about you?
Mm, Similar to Lena, I feel like Japanese people just view racism as something that's only between the white people and black people and not like mm, Asian
Yeah.
people problem. And they're kind of one step back viewing about this topic. And sometimes I feel like they're not informed enough to kind of talk about it casually with Japanese people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I think since Japan has a very strong focus on etiquette and conformity, Japanese people especially have a really hard time just speaking up about issues in society that exist. So, sexism is so present in Japan, yet people don't even know how to call it out. And they become so used to not calling it out that they just forget that it exists sometimes. And Mm, I think also because there's a model minority myth, especially for Asians, and especially in Japan, where it's kind of like a popular Asian country, as you might say it. Like, if somebody were talking about Asia, then they would probably point to Japan or China or Korea. So we kind of recognize this. Like, Japanese people don't recognize that they are a minority. If you go out to the world, like if you leave Japan, then they are probably the minority and they will probably experience racism, but they don't recognize that because most of the time it will never happen to them or they will never notice that it exists.
Right. Yeah, you're completely right. I think with a lot of the people who stay in Japan, they're not necessarily exposed to any racist encounters themselves. So, like you said, it's very hard for them to empathize for something that they've never been a part of because they're surrounded by people who look like them and act like them. But yeah, Lena, you mentioned like racism not necessarily being thought of in the Asian perspective. And yeah, that's completely true. I think a lot of Japanese people, specifically the older generation, sort of excuse um, things that might be racist or anti-Korean, anti-Chinese, for example,
Mm-hmm.
just because they don't necessarily think that it applies to racism because racism is thought of to be a Western thing sometimes. So yeah, those are very good points about racial sensitivity in Japan today. Okay, let's narrow this down a little bit. I think, especially in an international school, which all three of us go to, surprise, um, people get scared when you start talking about racism. I think the summer of 2019 was the first time a lot of people spoke out about it. And they weren't afraid to be wrong, which I think is a very powerful move just because it shows that you're willing to learn and you're willing to evolve. But before that, I think if I mentioned racism in a class, everybody would go silent. And whether this be because, oh, the half black girl is starting to talk about racism again and all that kind of like connotations that the topic of racism would have sort of impacted a lot of the fears that I would have. So I wouldn't want to talk about racism because I didn't want to look like that social justice girl. But I think, yeah, the summer kind of like provoked a lot of that in a lot of people. So, yeah, anyways, that was a little tangent. So why do you think it's really hard for people to talk about racism in international schools?
I think it's because we get sold this myth by the school itself that, oh, we learn about so many different cultures and we're so accepting and things like that. And to an extent, I think we are privileged to the fact that we get to meet people who are from so many different cultures, and we have events like Festival of Nations that let us have an insight into the cultures of different countries. But also, that kind of blinds us to the fact that that's just we're experiencing the easy to understand and mm, easy to experience part of different countries, like the food and the music and everything that's fun to us, and we don't have to treat it so importantly. And so we have an issue with recognizing that racism and things like that exist because we're in this kind of bubble where we think that we're learning about different cultures and we think that we're experiencing different cultures when in reality we're only touching on the parts of that that are beneficial to us, and sometimes the other parts are kind of embarrassing or things like that.
Yeah, Lena?
I feel like because we have diversity in our class, we of course get to interact with people who have different backgrounds than our own, and we feel like by being building relationship with them, we could feel like we're not related to racism and all the things that are happening uh, outside. But sometimes we need to like focus on what we can do to reduce on help alleviate racism.
Yeah, both of you make really good points. I think because we go to a private international school, what we think is racism may not necessarily be the form it takes in the quote unquote outside world, outside of the circles that we're limited to. Because, a certain group of people can afford to go to international school, can afford to be admitted into international school in the first place. So, yeah, we're going to see a lot of, I guess, very different people, but also very similar. Maybe in terms of history, or maybe in terms of social class and things like that. So yeah, very good job. Okay, so kind of the same area when we're talking to teachers, when we're talking to friends, and when we're talking to family. I guess we speak. I personally think that people speak differently when it comes to racism. So I'll start for this one. For example, when I talk to racism about my with my mom, I'm a lot more cautious. Just in terms, just because she comes from, she's been exposed to different things than I have, different media, different history, things like that. Like she's fully Japanese, and it's not that I'm not less confrontational, but the language there changes a lot, right? Whereas when I'm with my friends, I'm a lot more direct. Like, if they say something that I think is a little bit maybe uh, out of line, I'll say it instantly. But when it comes to teachers, I think I speak for a lot of people my age. Teachers would be the hardest person to acknowledge, just because there's a fear of your personal relationship with the teacher as well as your professional relationship, because the teacher gives you your grades, and I know that it shouldn't be like you're not sacrificing your grades when you talk to them about them saying things that are out of line, but at the same time, there is that fear there, because they have this quote unquote power. So yeah, what do you guys think about sensitivity when you're talking to different people? Just general thoughts.
Like one day, I read this article on how Black Lives Matter movement uh, were not successful or fell flat in Japan in
Mm,
that individuals in society class, and I was interested about it, so I kind of talked to my mom,
mm,
and I kind of told her that how Japan is kind of closed-minded and they should educate themselves to know how to, I guess, interact with people who are not Japanese and different. But she said um, Japanese are kind of want to um, like protect their own
yeah.
beliefs and culture, and yeah, so they're not like, and most of them are Japanese and home, like Lina's mentioned before. Japan is homogeneous society,
Mm,
so people think that um, they shouldn't. Yeah, like Japanese want to protect their own culture that they have been building the past centuries, and I feel like they're scared to feel like their culture is not being respected anymore by kind of accepting people for not Japanese.
yeah, no, that's valid. That's very valid. Um, Lena, yeah.
Personally, my mom sent me to an international school because she thought that I would experience racism. Well, she personally calls it bullying more than racism, but it's racism nonetheless, just being picked on for not being Japanese. So she sent me to Seisen. So when I told her that I was interested in anti racism and social justice and things like that, or when I told her that I joined this club and things like that, she was, mm, I don't know how to say this in English, but 否定的
Uh,
towards the fact that racism, like I explained that we discussed the fact that there's still racism in Seisen as well, and she had that attitude that like, well, I sent you to Seisen to not experience racism, so what? Like, she was very unaccepting towards the idea that there might be racism in Seisen and things like that.
mm,
And in general, I think she is self-preservative, so she doesn't think that I myself can make society change. And obviously, like, it's true, I can't do that myself, but obviously there's a community like this, and I think it's important just because that I recognize that there is an issue and I am passionate about it. But I think, yeah, since Japanese people are taught to conform and taught to be the same for everybody for most of the time, like Lena mentioned, they want to be conservative towards their culture and they want to protect it and keep it the way that it is. So I think there's a sensitivity towards that, especially with parents, because like in Japan, there is a respect elders type of attitude. So even with that power dynamic, it's hard to approach issues like racism because, like mentioned in the start of this episode, like they don't actually understand that it exists, and then even when we explain it to them, they are they want to kind of refuse that it exists just because of the benefit of the conservative Japan, and also just they don't want to believe.
Yeah. No, I think that's very common with especially our parents' generation. Not that they don't believe that racism exists. It's just that when something is supposed to be excluding racism, they like to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And it's a sad truth that that might not always be the case. My mom too sent me to international schools when I was younger and now, um, just to avoid any stress that I might feel from um, racism. Fun fact: there was a study done in the United States, and people who are Black generally have higher blood pressure because of like societal stress that's like imposed by racism. So it's very sad because that actually makes them prone to heart attacks and things like that. So that's a topic you might want to look into later. But I digress. Anyway, I think because we live in Tokyo, uh, and in total there are probably around 30 Black people, 30 dark skinned people. We have a lot of Indians, I guess, too. A lot of South Asians. But it's important to know that Japanese people in general aren't all fair skinned. Like if you go further south, like to Okinawa, they're quite tan. Like they're almost my skin tone, maybe even darker. But yeah, when you look at makeup brands or advertisements in the city, they all are uh, people with fair skin. Um, and I can say when I went to Okinawa for a little bit, it was still the same. So I think, especially in East Asia, because it's so hard to say that it is racist because it's not really, but there's an exclusion of skin tones, especially in Thailand. In Thailand, they have what's it called, like light skin lightening soap, like skin bleaching soap, and they are so popular that they sell them for really cheap, and that really bothered me when I first found out. But
If you go into like a Japanese drugstore where they sell all that cosmetic stuff and skincare and whatever, then there will usually, like, each brand will have a sector for bihaku, which means pretty white
Yeah.
skin. And it's not necessarily racism, like you mentioned, it's more of colorism because it's directed, in general, it's directed towards Japanese people who have non fair skin.
darker.
In process, it excludes people who have darker skin, and it's really harmful just because it's excluding people who have darker skin that are not Japanese and excluding people who have darker skin that are Japanese, and it's really just like no point.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
There was like one time
mm,
that I experienced, I mean, not me, more like my friend. So I was walking with my friends to yoga station, and one of my friend was from Kenya, and another friend was from Canada.
mm,
Then before the ticket gate, uh, this officer kind of stopped us and told us to show them the certificate or something. And they asked us if which school we go to, and we answered Seisen International School, and they were like, "Oh, okay." And then I asked them why, and they were like, they didn't answer me clearly, but they just said, "Oh, we just needed to know." So that was something that really bothered me.
it,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think it's okay that it bothers you because it shows you, like yourself, that something fell off in that interaction. And what's horrible is that sometimes, a lot of the times, especially when you're older, that question is going to sit in the back of your head. Like, oh, was it because of how I looked? Or was it because of the color of my skin? Or, sorry, or something like that. So, yeah, I think it's a pressure that you'll feel, especially when you're around like 14. So yeah, I think it's a pressure that you'll feel um, a lot later. Hopefully not. Hopefully this was just a my generation thing, but yeah, sadly it's very common. especially with public interaction when people come up to you. But in terms of sensitivity, I think a lot of people try to invalidate that. So let's say I experience something and I talk to it about a non-Black or non-Asian friend, and they go, "Oh, that was just a normal interaction. Like, it's not because of your race." They don't know that. I don't know that. And it's sad because it could be the question of, "Oh, maybe I'm just too sensitive." But also there's also a chance that I wasn't. So, yeah, okay. This got really sad, so we're gonna move on. Okay. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Do you want to quickly talk about microaggressions?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with hair.
Yes.
So all three of us have very different hair right now. Okay. I had really curly hair when I was younger, and then it started to straighten out when I was older. And it bothered me a lot because my mom would be like, "Oh, your hair is so pretty now." Like, but it wasn't all pretty before. So yeah, that's one thing. What about you, Nina?
Uh,
Oh,
just personal anecdote, but then my mom is a lawyer, so she has very many friends in different domains. So I would often accompany her to parties and things like that. I mean, obviously pre-COVID, but once I went to this, my mom's friend established this company, so we were having a celebration, and I accompanied her to that, and then this woman introduced herself to me, and then the like straight after she introduced herself to me and I introduced myself to her, she was like, "Can I touch your hair?" And I was like, "Oh, so that's why you introduced yourself to me." I mean, obviously there is a child in an institution and like everybody is Japanese and they don't see any black people, so like whose child is this? I mean, it kind of makes sense. I don't think that's racism at all, but why is the first question after you introduce yourself to me?
Why do you want to touch my hair so bad?
Can I touch your hair? So I like you can't really say no in those situations because if you say no, then you're a weird child or you're a stingy child, and obviously it's my mom's friends, so I didn't want to kind of mess with her, you know.
Have that relationship.
Yeah. And I think I was pretty visibly uncomfortable, but yeah, and then especially I went to a Japanese kindergarten up until I transferred to Seisen.
Me too. Sorry, go ahead.
But a lot of people like asked me about my hair there. Like even in Seisen, it doesn't really change, but they want to touch your hair. They want to know if you wash your hair, which I don't understand that question because obviously I wash my hair. That would be very unsanitary if I did not. Or like, how do you wash your hair? I wash it with my fingers. Like, it's really unnecessary questions that you can just Google, or you can ask your parents to Google if you're really young. And I know as a really small child, like it probably doesn't cross your mind, but I think just because they have never seen that hair, but they've kind of been influenced by the media that subtly kind of just shows black people for their culture and their hair and everything that is beneficial to these privileged people in wherever cases, they just treat you as this like window to whatever community that they're looking for insight in. And I mean, I I wouldn't mind it if they had like Googled some information and then they wanted to hear like a personal anecdote or stuff like that. But it's really just unnecessary. And sadly, I don't really become uncomfortable anymore because I've just been desensitized to it and I'm just like accepted it by now. But it's just really like, why is it necessary? Why do you need to do that? And I feel like often people who meet me especially just Japanese people, they talk about my hair first when in reality, like, I am a person. And I'm not saying you have to be super interested in me, but I like it if we discussed normal people things and not my hair.
That's very fair. I think because they don't see a lot of afro or kinky hair,
Yeah.
people are so entranced by it, but it definitely should be a lot more normalized. It would have saved me a lot of stress when I was younger. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Lena, do you want to add to that?
I I feel really guilty because I was the one who used to ask, "Can I touch your hair?"
Yeah.
when I see um like like before I came to Seisen, I used to be in Japanese school until fourth grade,
Mm.
and then all my classmates were Japanese, and we all had same straight hair. And then when I came to Seisen, I it was my first time interacting with people that are not Japanese, and I was really interested in seeing those hairstyles that I've never seen in my other school.
Yeah.
So I don't think I even asked them if I could touch it. I think I just touched.
Yeah.
You just touched it.
Yeah. And I also asked them how they wash their hair because I was really curious, and I
Yeah.
am very sorry. I
No,
am missing a lot of things
Yeah.
right now.
I mean, for a child, I think, like, I mean, obviously we're still children, but for children who are in elementary school, I think most of it is just there's no bad intentions. It just comes off wrong. And
100%.
when it happens a lot, it just gets really annoying, whether it's racism or not. But it happened so much to like my black friends who have curly hair that it will kind of become like a sarcastic, like ironic joke within us to like touch each other's hair and be like, "Wow, it's so fluffy," like
Oh yeah.
just because we
Wait,
know.
you,
Yeah,
you guys want to learn how I learned not to ask to touch hair? It was it wasn't awkward. Okay, first of all, it was my sister. It was my older sister, and she has very afro hair, like afro like hair. It was very curly. And um I was oh I think I was either your age or older. I should have known better, but I asked if I could touch her hair, and I've never seen this woman get so mad. I swear, her eyes turned red, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And she was like, you never asked a black woman if you can touch her hair." And I was like, "Good to know, good to know." So it's okay, Elena, because I learned a lot later, even though I am half black myself. Um, but yeah, I think oh my god, when we talk about hair, I my attention level spikes because I am watching who's going to slip up and say something, because I think a lot of people have prejudice against hair that they don't realize, and
yeah,
that's what we're trying to acknowledge in school, to make sure that people know that all kinds of hair, all kinds of natural hair is completely formal, is completely appropriate for school, and we're just going to make sure that that actually stays the case for international schools, for public schools, wherever you may be. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, we're actually a little over time. Do you guys want to say any last things before we conclude?
uh,
Yeah.
in general, I think in Japan, the topics that we mentioned, like stereotypes and microaggressions, and discussing racism with people that are not are not aware of it, like Japanese people in general, and even your parents and stuff. It's really hard to do that because Japanese people, like I mentioned, they like to conform because they've been taught to do so, and they are just conservative in nature just because of their education. So it's gonna be hard to do that because they probably won't recognize it, and even if they do, they will be very dismissive towards it. So
I mean, yeah, I think everything's up for discussion, but eventually, that is what we're trying to change. We're trying to make sure that um, socially we do progress, especially in the upcoming years. I think there's a lot more people of darker skin tones or mixed people, half people, um, immigrants. So we're gonna make sure that they have a better Japan to stay in, a better Tokyo to live in. So yeah, Lena, do you want to add on anything?
Mm, I agree with Mina.
Me too. Thank you for listening, everybody. We had a very insightful discussion. It was very casual, very opinion based. So, as always, we encourage you to do your own research, have these discussions of your own with your friends, family, younger peers. So, yeah, that was our discussion on racial and cultural sensitivity. And thank you for watching. Say bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.